Do you love cherry tomatoes, but the only place you have to grow them is a small space garden? So that means in a container. And you don't know how in the world you do that because cherry tomatoes get so big. Now, I've never really been a cherry tomato fan. I know, crazy, right? But that all changed a couple years ago when I tried growing sun gold. It was like candy. It's so good. So that's what I'm going to be growing today in a container. Now, this is my sun gold tomato plant. And it looks small now, but it doesn't stay smaller than any other cherry tomato plant. In fact, it's pretty vigorous. So how do you grow this in a small space in a container? Well, first let's talk about what pot to use. So generally the rule of thumb is the bigger pot, the better, especially for large tomatoes that are indeterminate, like a cherry tomato. Now, indeterminate just means they're gonna grow and grow and grow and produce and produce and produce until the cold weather comes to kill them. So cherry tomatoes and regular indeterminate tomatoes are a little bit different. Regular indeterminates grow up single stem in my garden. However, cherry tomatoes, we do not prune at all. And so we want to start out with a pot that is, I would say, no smaller than 7 gallons. So this is a 7-gallon grow bag, just for kind of comparison. That's a 3-gallon pot right there. And the reason we say bigger is better is because the bigger the container, the easier it is to regulate the moisture and the nutrients in that container. The smaller the container, the faster it's going to dry out and the faster it's going to lose nutrients out the bottom. This is the container I'm going to be using. I'm guessing it's about 15 gallons. But we have a dry climate here. In the summer, we get no rain at all. And so I want to make sure it's got the biggest pot available so I can regulate the moisture a lot easier throughout the season. Now, soil is the most expensive part about growing anything in containers. And I get asked all the time, do I need to replace all of the soil every year in my containers? The answer is absolutely not. You can see in this pot, it's probably 2/3 full of soil. I didn't really have much of anything growing in it last year, but that doesn't mean that we have to get rid of all this soil. And look, there's plenty of life in it. There's a worm. We just need to refresh it. Now, like I said, this is 2/3 full already. If it was about full to the top, you'd want to take about 1/3 of the soil out, throw it out in the garden. It's still going to be beneficial out there. And then you're going to take some new soil and fill it up a little at a time. And while you fill it, go ahead and mix it in to the soil that's already in there. Now, since we're setting this up in a new spot, I need to get drip irrigation to this pot. All right, well, this pot's done with me. I just cracked it. So we're starting over with this pot. So I'm just transferring the soil into this new pot. I'm going to fill it up to within about 2 inches of the top. All right, so in refreshing the soil, we got to add some nutrients back in. There are some nutrients in the new potting mix, but not enough. So I'm going to start off with granular organic fertilizer. I've got some Neptune's Harvest crab and lobster shell, basically the ground up shells of crabs and lobsters, and some kelp meal, basically dried ground up kelp. Organic fertilizer is very straightforward. So I'm going to mix that in to the top few inches. Now, you might look at the numbers on these bags. This is a 530. This is a 102, and think, well, Miracle-Gro's got way more than that. And it's true, Miracle-Gro does. But Miracle-Gro or something like that that's not organic can push way too many nutrients into your plant and cause them to grow very fast and not have the stability to hold up the growth that it created. And so it becomes floppy, and ultimately it becomes a magnet for pests because they're not slow and sturdy, they're fast and furious. And pests love that. Also, what these lack for in these 3 numbers, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, they make up for in tons of micronutrients and enzymes that things like Miracle-Gro just doesn't have. And that's what your plants really want and need. Now, I've always said, well, and it's true, tomatoes grow roots all along their stem. And so I used to recommend that you plant them deep because that would give you more roots along the stem underneath the soil. I still recommend that in a seedling like this in the cup. You can fill the cup as it grows. I have a whole video on growing tomatoes from seed. I'll link below. However, I did some experimenting last year, and I planted some deep, I planted some normal, I planted some on their side, and there wasn't that big of a difference between all 3 of them in terms of the plant and what it produced. And I've also seen some other experiments on YouTube that had the same outcomes. So if you want to plant it deep, plant it deep. I'm not going to worry about it anymore. It's just one extra step and more digging. All right, so nice root system. Just going to plant it in here. In the center, of course. Now there's a couple more things that I used to do that I'm not going to do anymore. And that was adding a couple of additional nutrients right at planting time. The first one was calcium. I used to add gypsum to the soil here in the pot to make sure they had enough calcium. Because if you've ever seen your tomatoes look like this, where they look brown and rotten at the bottom, that's blossom end rot. And that's caused by a lack of calcium in the fruit or in the plant, not necessarily a lack of calcium in the soil. And you're going to get blossom end rot more often in container grown tomatoes than in ground tomatoes. In the ground, tomatoes can put their roots out further if they need more moisture, more nutrients, but in a pot, they're confined to this pot. And so for watering, if you are not consistent with your watering, tomatoes aren't going to be able to bring the calcium from the soil, because I'm almost positive there's plenty of calcium in this soil for this tomato plant. But if it doesn't have consistent moisture, it's not going to be able to consistently bring calcium in. And when there's a slowdown of calcium, that's when you get blossom end rot. So I'm not going to add that at the beginning. Now, if you do mess up and you forget to water and the plant dries out and you notice blossom end rot, it is fixable. Not on the tomatoes that already have it. You can pluck those off and you can cut that bottom part off and eat the rest. But if you want to, then you can add some gypsum. Put about a half a cup to a cup of gypsum in some water, mix it up, maybe a gallon of water or so, and then water the plant with it. That's going to get more moisture and more calcium just in case, but more often than not, just starting to water regularly again is going to fix that issue. Now there's another nutrient I used to add, and that is magnesium. And I did that through Epsom salts. Now I know all over the internet, Epsom salts are like the miracle drug for plants, right? Except they're not. And I'm not going to get into big arguments here. I know people swear by it, but there's no proof that it does most of the things that it does. Now it is a source of magnesium, I'll give you that. However, just like calcium, there's probably plenty of magnesium right here in this planting mix. The problem with Epsom salts is when you have too much magnesium, it actually competes with calcium for uptake into the plant. So magnesium or Epsom salts could actually end up being part of the cause of blossom end rot. So I don't worry about it unless you see the plant leaves starting to turn purple and just look completely weird, maybe yellowing purple. That is a lack of magnesium. And at that point, you can take a quarter cup of Epsom salts, sprinkle it around the top, and water it in, because then you know it needs magnesium, and magnesium is what Epsom salt is. So those two things we're not going to worry about from the beginning. Now, other than keeping it moist, which is not as easy in a pot as it is in the ground, we also have to keep it fed, because just like I mentioned, in the ground, if they need more nutrients, they're going to send their roots further to get it. Not so in a pot. we are responsible 100% for their well-being. And so starting about 3 or 4 weeks after planting, every week I give it a solution of Neptune's Harvest tomato and veg formula. I have discounts on all these, so I'll leave it down below in the description. Now, I love the tomato and veg formula because not only does it have a great NPK with the middle number being for the fruit and flowering is the highest, it also has humate in it, which actually feeds the microbes in the soil, but it also has yucca extract. And you might think, well, what does that have anything to do with this? Yucca extract is a wetting agent that holds on to moisture. In a pot, that's exactly what you need. It helps keep the moisture in the pot around the root system. So it is perfect for tomatoes in pots and in the ground, but in pots for sure. It's not a sponsored video by Neptune's Harvest at all. I do have the discount code, but I've been using it for 6 years now and love it. Now I'm putting drip irrigation in this pot. And I'm actually adding drip to this, and in tomorrow's video, I'll be talking about drip and a bunch of other ways that you can water your container garden. So make sure you're subscribed so you won't miss it. All right, the next thing is we've got moisture coming to the plant to water it. Now we need to keep that moisture in. And we're gonna do something that most people don't think of doing in pots. In fact, unfortunately, a lot of people don't remember to do it in the ground, and that is to mulch. So I'm just gonna use some wood shavings, pine shavings, just a nice thick layer covering up all that potting mix. This is gonna keep the weeds down. There shouldn't be too many weeds in planter's mix, but it's also gonna keep the moisture in. You can use pine shavings, you can use gravel, whatever you got, it's gonna help. All right, now we need to talk about support. Cherry tomatoes are indeterminate, but they do grow a little bit differently than normal indeterminate plants. Normal indeterminate plants, I take all the side shoots out, I grow them up a string, and they just keep growing until the cold weather ends their life. The only time you'd prune a cherry tomato is for shape. If it's going crazy, it's getting out of bounds, you just trim it up a little bit to keep it where you want it. The side shoots that we'd pull out of a traditional indeterminate plant, those don't really produce that much fruit. However, on a cherry tomato, it's the exact opposite. The side shoots produce a lot of fruit. So we don't want to take any shoots off that aren't getting in the way or crowding out something else. So in terms of support, I'm going to be using a tomato cage, and it's a sturdy tomato cage. You don't want one of those tomato cages where it's flimsy and it practically falls apart before you get it home. I've had this one for several years and it's held together. And we just want to push these into the ground as far as we can. Prefer to get this first ring about 8 to 10 inches off of the soil surface. This is going to give your tomato something to grow on and grow through and give it some support. So I'm going to let it fill this whole thing up. If it gets out here and it's crowding my other pots, then I'm going to start trimming it a little bit, but that's it. Okay, wait, no, that's not it. You also want to do some pruning at the bottom of the plant. If the leaves start getting yellow or brown or look like they're starting to get some spots on them, just take those off. The older leaves toward the bottom that start getting discolored and things, those are the weakest, and those are the ones that pests and disease will attack first. So keep them off the plant. Now for pest control, I wrote the book on companion planting. Tomatoes have a lot of companions that they love. Find out the best one for you by going to plantingcalculator.com, look at tomatoes, and it's going to show you what are the best companion plants for tomatoes, and everything's based on your zip code. Again, if you haven't started your tomato seeds, here's a video right here. Foolproof way to get them started and grown fast so you can get this season going. I'll see you guys next time.